ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਕੋਲੰਬੀਆ ਵਿੱਚ ਸ਼ੁੱਕਰਵਾਰ ਨੂੰ ਕੋਵਿਡ ਕਰਕੇ 9 ਹੋਰ ਮੌਤਾਂ ਦੇ ਮਾਮਲੇ ਸਾਹਮਣੇ ਆਏ ਨੇ। ਇਸ ਦੌਰਾਨ ਕੋਵਿਡ-19 ਦੇ ਮਰੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਦੀ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਵੱਧਦੀ ਹੀ ਜਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਡਾਕਟਰ ਬੋਨੀ ਹੈਨਰੀ ਨੇ BC ਵਾਸੀਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੇਕਰ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਬਿਮਾਰ ਹੋਵੇ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਘਰ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਰਹੇ ਅਤੇ ਦੂਜਿਆਂ ਤੋਂ ਦੂਰੀ ਬਣਾ ਕੇ ਰੱਖੇ। ਇਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਹੋਰ ਕਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਹੀਆਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸੁਣਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ।
A few slides giving some information that we have been pulling together around people who are in hospital and help us understand who is more likely to end up with severe enough illness that they require hospitalization. We continue to see a decrease and a slowdown in new cases in British Columbia, and as of the last few days, tentatively, a slowing down in hospital admissions. However, they do continue to be high relative to what we have seen throughout this pandemic. So to give you a sense of hospitalization risk based on people we're seeing in hospital in British Columbia, and this is a measure that we've been trying to understand who is in our hospitals. How has it changed during this period, with Omicron being the predominant strain that we're seeing circulating, and who is at risk? And there's a number of reasons for this. One is so that we can provide that extra advice to people about who needs to be tested, who needs to take extra precautions in the community, but also so that we know that it can guide who has access to the treatments that are becoming available here in BC, including Paxlovid, which we received and will be receiving, as well as Sotrovimab, which is a monoclonal antibody that is used for some people as well. So what we did, and kudos to our analysis team, we looked at 606 people who were hospitalized out of a little over 49,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases between December 14th and January 6th. And we analyzed what were the risk factors underlying people's need for admission to hospital. And during this period of time, the hospitalization rate was in confirmed cases during this period was 1.2%. So that is very similar to what we presented in the modeling presentation a week ago, and it shows that it is a dramatic decrease from what we saw with the Delta wave that we were managing between September and October. So what puts someone at risk, greater risk for COVID-19 hospitalization now? And it should be said, this is similar to what we have seen across the entire pandemic. The single most important risk factor for having severe illness with COVID-19 that requires hospitalization is age. And people who are aged 80 and over are 28 times more likely to be hospitalized if they get infected with COVID-19, controlling for every other risk factor. So this is really, really important. Once again, we know that it is our seniors and elders who are most at risk in the community, in long-term care homes, and across the board. And really, we see that major increase after age 70. We also see an increase in risk of hospitalization for people who have immune compromising conditions, and we have a few of those on here. If you're a transplant recipient, for example, people who have diabetes, respiratory illness, heart conditions, and as we have found out through the studies that have been led by investigators here in BC, that pregnancy is also a risk for having more severe illness and ending up in hospital. On the positive side, we see across the board, again, that vaccination is highly, highly protective, and it reduces your risk by 9 times if you control for all of these other factors to have your booster dose. And that's encouraging. It reminds us that right now, being vaccinated not only reduces your risk of being infected, though it's not 100% for sure, but when you get that third booster dose, it does increase your risk, or decrease your risk of being infected, but dramatically decreases your risk of needing hospitalization. If we look at, we divide things out by risk categories. and we look at people who have combinations of risk factors that make them at a very high risk. We see that between the period of September and October and December and January, so comparing what was predominantly Delta to now what's predominantly Omicron, that regardless of the risk category, there's a lower rate of hospitalization right now. So that's important. That tells us that even those at very high risk have a much lower hospitalization rate now than what we were seeing in the fall. And this is a combination of factors, including the fact that most people, especially in the very high risk categories, are vaccinated right now. But also it does reflect that Omicron is causing less severe illness in most people. The challenge, of course, that we have is that Omicron is infecting many more people. So this lower hospitalization rate still translates into large numbers of people requiring hospital care, and we're seeing that impact in our hospitals right now. The other thing that we can look at is putting this together by risk, by age group. So putting how many people in each age category fit into the high, medium, low, or very low risk age groups, and you can risk categories. And as you can see, for people under age 20, the vast majority of that population is a very low risk, with a small proportion at about a low risk and an even smaller proportion with a medium risk. But as we go up in age, the proportion of people in that age category who have those higher risk factors for ending up in hospital goes up. So again, it's another way of looking at who are more likely to end up in hospital, regardless of all the important things that we put in place to, like vaccination, and who needs to take extra precautions, be extra careful about what they're doing in the community, about the measures that they're taking as Omicron is spreading widely right now. So putting all this together, it helps us get what we call a heat map, or a whole a way of looking at our risk based on age, based on our sex, because we know that has implications. We know that since the beginning of this pandemic, men with COVID are more likely to be have more severe illness and be admitted to hospital than women for a variety of reasons. But it also helps us break it down by vaccination. And really, what you can see across the board is once you have 2 doses of vaccine, and particularly as we get older, 3 doses of vaccine are highly protective at keeping people out of hospital. And those people right now who are most at risk, who are most likely to end up in hospital if you get infected with COVID, are people who do not have any vaccines. So a combination of things that we are looking at. This supports the information that we provided through the modeling that was done last week, and it really looks at who is in our hospital, who's at risk of ending up in hospital with this wave that we are all going through right now. And that tells us what are the things that we can do and who do we need to focus on to prevent hospitalizations and severe illness, putting this all together. And so I know this is difficult to see on the screen, but it will be available on the BC CDC website, and I encourage people to have a look. If we look at young people who are vaccinated, and even older people who are vaccinated with 3 doses, your risk of having severe enough illness that you need hospitalization is negligible. It's under 1%. So that's important. That's really good news. And even 2 doses reduces your risk substantially. But if you are even younger, and you don't have vaccine on board, your chances of getting more severe illness go up dramatically, particularly if you have any of the underlying at-risk conditions that make it more likely. So this gives us a sense of what is going on in terms of the people who are ending up in hospital right now. As we know, this is a rapidly evolving situation with Omicron, and I know that when public health guidance changes, the changes raise a lot of questions and concerns. We all ask ourselves, with the new or eased restrictions, what does this mean to me and my family, and what do I need to be doing differently as we move through this new and different wave of the pandemic. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this. I have talked about some of the changes we have in testing and isolation, but I think we need to go back to the basic principles. The Omicron variant is different, so we have adapted how we manage this situation. While most people now will not need testing for COVID-19, it is important that we all have the information we need about what measures we can take to prevent spread of illness and to manage when we are exposed or get sick ourselves. Even with Omicron spreading, most people being tested for COVID-19 don't have it. Yes, we have our highest test positivity rates ever, and it's in the 20% to 30% range. But that means that 70% of people with symptoms who are being tested don't have COVID-19. So we need to put that in context as well. This change aligns with the evidence-based communicable disease principles that we follow when we manage in public health, when we're managing any respiratory communicable disease. And from the very beginning, contact tracing is a public health intervention that is well suited and applied to some communicable diseases and not others. Disease characteristics that make contact tracing effective are things like having a longer incubation period, because you have to have time to find people after somebody's been tested.